Alright, this is week 2.1 graded assignment, calculating transportation costs. My name is Emily Downs, and to give you an overview of the high school that I looked at for calculating the transportation costs was Burlington High School. Burlington High School owns all of their own buses for their school district. They're responsible for the hiring and the training of their own bus drivers. They do have a partnership with the city of Burlington and its public transit urban service, which just allows to get more buses out on school bus routes, especially when there's a shortage of bus drivers for the school district. And then it also supplements revenue for the city of Burlington as well, helping out the Burlington School District. Last year, Burlington spent 1.4 million on transportation. So to look at transportation for athletics, the student athletes at Burlington High School are transported to all off-site practice facilities via school bus. So that includes the football stadium, the golf course, and this will be the first year for the tennis facility. That will all be off-site facilities. They are transported to those facilities but are responsible for finding a ride home from those facilities. So the school bus doesn't transport the student athletes back to the school after the practice. Student athletes are also transported to all out-of-town events and back to the school after the event, but they are not transported back to their homes. So if they rode a school bus to school that day, they had an event, the school bus is not going to drop them off back at home, but the student athlete has to arrange to be picked up after the school bus gets back to the school, concluding the event. So looking at breaking down transportation costs for a women's sport and a men's sport, I picked men's and women's swimming. So to look at men's varsity swimming, junior varsity and varsity are put together in swimming. You don't have, based on the size of your junior varsity swim team, you don't have separate junior varsity meets, but it's all one meet, just different heats running for junior varsity and varsity. And so for the men's varsity and junior varsity teams, they had 11 different meets. I looked at the schedule for when those meets were and then the start times, and then I calculated the end time based on my knowledge of swim meets, whether it was a dual meet versus one opponent or an invitational versus multiple opponents. A dual meet usually lasts 2 hours and an invitational usually lasts 8 hours. I looked at the location of where the event was taking place, and then I calculated from Burlington to the location where the event was taking place and about how many hours there and back it would take for the school bus driver to drive the team to the event. And then I also added the total time of the event. And then I took the total number of hours between the time to and from the event and the total time of the event and multiplied it by the bus driver's wage that Burlington High School pays their bus drivers, which is $17.64 an hour. And that's how I got the total cost of the transportation for the bus driver for the team. And so for Burlington High School, they pay a higher hourly wage for their bus drivers and don't pay in addition per mileage, but just pay per hour. And so for the men's varsity and junior varsity swim team, for 11 meets, 4 of those being at home, they spent $842.81 on transportation costs. And then for the women's team, they had 8 meets, and I did the same thing in calculating their start time, end time, and looking at where the meet was, the time from to and from the event, and then calculating the total number of hours based on the bus driver's wage. And so for the women's varsity and junior varsity swim team, they spent $463.74 on, and that's projected for the 2018 season. So what could be factored into here is any additional meets that get added, or any invitationals that get added as well. So out of the 8 meets for the women, 4 of them were at home. So that's why you saw a decrease in transportation costs on the women's team versus the men's team. They had 11 meets, 4 of which were at home. So 63% of their meets were out of town, whereas only 50% of the women's meets were out of town, reducing the cost of transportation for the women's teams. So kind of going through the calculations, you have to look at, how many events each team participates in during their season, the start time, and how long the event is going to be held, the opponent which the event was against, and where the event was held. So I calculated the total number of hours it took to get to the event facility from the school, and then back to the school from the event facility. So I calculated the hours because the Burlington High School pays the bus drivers an hourly wage and not in addition to the mileage. But if they did, that would be another calculation you'd have to consider, would be to add in the additional cents that the bus drivers are paid per mileage, in addition to their how many hours they're spending driving the bus as well. So calculating the total time of the bus drive plus the time of the event and multiplying it by the hourly bus driver wage of $17.64 an hour reaches a total cost of transportation for each of those 2 sports that I calculated. So altogether, for the men's and the women's swimming teams for the fall and winter season, Burlington High School spends around $1,306.55. So that kind of gives an athletic director and a head coach a good idea about how roughly how much is being spent on one sport transportation cost. Some things to consider though: meet schedules rarely change within the men's and women's swim teams. You really host around the same amount of meets each season, but things that could factor in to the budget for transportation costs could be any events that are canceled due to the weather. However, usually those events are made up. Those locations could change those. So maybe instead of traveling 3 hours, now the meet is going to be hosted at your home facility. So that could cut back the cost of transportation. The location could change due to pool maintenance. So maybe you were expected to host a meet and you had an issue with your pool that now the meet had to be hosted out of town, in which you didn't project for the total of your transportation costs for that season. And then also factoring in the time the bus drivers are waiting for swimmers to change, how long the meet runs, if they have any technical difficulties throughout the meet, any factors that could keep the bus driver there longer than anticipated. And then also one thing to calculate into would be depending how far the drive is for the team. If the team decides to stop for any meals, that's also going to add on the hours in which the bus driver is with the team. And for Burlington High School, since they're paid on an hourly basis, that does increase the cost of the total transportation cost. But the $1,306.55 gives a good idea roughly about how much you're going to spend and can project from year to year, giving a little bit of, maybe anywhere from $1,000 to, $1,750 throughout the school year that the men's and women's swim teams are going to spend on the total cost of transportation.